Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's been a while since I've spoken up about SARS-CoV-2, COVID. But there's a kind of a heavy discussion I'd like to have this morning while I'm on my way into work. One of the things that's been popping up in my head and on my timelines and in my DMs a lot, obviously, is the Omicron variant. I want to discuss the variant a little bit. I want to talk about some of the issues we've had in framing COVID. I want to talk about the current state of affairs with COVID and what to look out for next. So first, Omicron is a variant of concern, which is currently on pace to be the predominant strain of COVID globally. It is a highly transmissible, modified version of SARS-CoV-2 with such a distinct genetic lineage that it's not a version of COVID that evolved from Delta or any other variant. It has a genetic timeline and genetic traits that show it as an entirely divergent variant, meaning that you had the original SARS-CoV-2 and then sometime a year later you had an entirely different branch of SARS-CoV-2 develop, which has led us to the Omicron variant. It has modifications to its spike protein that make it unique compared to other variants of SARS-CoV-2, and because of the way viruses work and genetic evolution, it has picked up some scraps from the common cold, which have allowed it to increase its transmissibility. So if you have a co-infection, if you have somebody that has a viral infection and you get another virus, it's not like a virus will prevent another virus from entering into a cell, especially a novel one or a zoonotic virus like SARS-CoV-2. You had someone pick up the common cold and also get sick with COVID, and inside of those cells, you had an exchange of genetic information between the common cold and SARS-CoV-2. So common cold goes in, SARS-CoV-2 goes in, they meet in a cell. Hey, what's up, man? Hey, how you doing? Hey, that's pretty cool you got there. Can I borrow that? You exchange the information. Person goes, and now this very new cell, very new virus is expelled. That virus then gets picked up by somebody else, so forth and so on. You guys at this point should understand how virus transmission works. So the Omicron variant has a doubling rate of infection, which is about a day and a half, compared to the Delta variant, which was roughly 3 days, and compared to OG SARS, which had a doubling rate of infection every 5 to 6 days. So you'll hear, luckily, Omicron variant is resulting in a lot of mild cases, so it's not really a concern. This leads me to my next point. Our framing of COVID infections and our framing of the disease in general needs to shift. It's about to be year 3, season 3 of COVID. The first year in, mortality. That's all we could talk about. That's all we could discuss. Ventilators, all of those things. It's all we could talk about because that's all we were seeing. Year 2 of COVID, we had vaccines available. We had people debating about their merit and natural immunity and all those things. But we were able to reduce mortality from COVID. And now you have some therapeutics that could potentially reduce the risk of hospitalization, severe disease. So in year 2, we've improved our weapons and our ability to combat COVID infections with preventatives and also potential therapeutics that will be able to hit the market soon, hopefully. We've also got monoclonal antibodies, which allow us to infuse antibodies into your system if you do catch COVID, which can then also help reduce the severity of disease and the risk of death. All of those are absolutely wonderful things. But having said that, we've also given people a false sense of security. Being vaccinated and having access to monoclonal antibodies, which side note, are difficult to come across and difficult to source, and we're actually running out of them because we're relying on them so much, and they take time to produce and screen and make sure that they are clean enough to use. Sterility of medicines is something that's very important and very crucial, especially for injectables. But that's another thing to talk about. But we have a false sense of security because we frame COVID infections as mild or severe. And severity is tied to hospitalization and death and everything else. Everything else outside of going to the hospital or dying is considered a mild case. Now think about that. We know for a fact now, we have enough data to determine that just getting exposed to COVID is enough to cause long-term deleterious health effects. Regardless of hospitalization, regardless of the risk of death, regardless of pre-existing conditions, the health of the individual, COVID infections are so stressful on the body that we've got significant evidence that just catching COVID is enough to lead to long-term health effects. You may have heard of long COVID. Long COVID does not matter about the expression of symptoms during infection. Asymptomatic individuals who catch COVID can suffer from long COVID. Long COVID has a host of neurological effects. You have issues like tinnitus, myocarditis, brain fog, acute fatigue syndrome, POTS, which is the postural tachycardia, basically, which means that switching positions can cause you to lose oxygen to the brain and black out, or other things like that. You have neurological issues like myalgias that result from just having exposure to COVID. Obviously, the OG things that people are aware of: loss of smell, loss of taste. All of those things are potentially debilitating, and they can be a side effect of just catching COVID, regardless of vaccination status, regardless of pre-existing conditions, regardless of if you've had the virus before. Just catching it gives you the opportunity to have these side effects. So we need to reframe our discussions as scientists, as public health leaders, as people who are looked to for advice from our family and friends or from government. We need to reframe COVID infections as not just severe, resulting in hospitalization, and mild everything else. We really, really, really need to consider all of the other long-term ramifications of being exposed to this virus. COVID is simultaneously a mass casualty and mass, I don't want to say crippling, but mass debilitating event, especially in a country that does not provide any type of financial assistance, social support, economic support for catching COVID. You catch COVID, you're double shotted and boosted, you still catch COVID, you suffer from acute fatigue and migraines, and you can't go to work. You live in America, I'm sorry, you are now at risk of losing your job, going into severe debt. All of the economic things that viruses and illnesses can affect can be affected regardless of vaccination status. Now, we can reduce dying by being vaccinated. We can reduce transmission by being vaccinated. We can reduce transmission by wearing masks and being vaccinated, and limiting our indoor exposure to other people that are vaccinated. That is how we cut off transmission. Omicron variant only exists because of vaccine inequality and because of a lack of vaccine uptake. We're still just barely over half of the U.S. eligible population vaccinated. Now, remember a few minutes ago I discussed how getting the common cold and coming into contact with COVID has resulted in the Omicron variant. We've had this discussion before, but it's time for a refresher. Every time you replicate a cell, every time you replicate a virus, you are going to have an error rate in replication. So an error in replication of a virus doesn't necessarily mean that it won't copy. What it means is that a copy that's generated has a slight difference in the genetic code of the virus. Now, this change in genetic code could result in nothing happening. It could result in some major changes, and it's no way to predict or determine how those changes will present themselves or when those changes will occur. So there are entire branches of science designed around applying computer learning and machine learning to viruses and understanding replication and understanding and predicting variants and the formation of variants and determining those error rates. But it's an inexact science. We don't have a ton of data. We're not really good at it yet. Not saying we won't be, but as of right now, we're still trying to get all of this data to be able to predict our future variants of concern, basically, for all viruses, really, all respiratory viruses for the most part. A lot of that data comes from, or is used to come up with the flu shot each year. We take emergent virus, emergent flu from the Far East, because it typically originates there. We figure out if that's the variant that is going to propagate, and then we modify the flu shots each year to potentially address that variant. And the only reason we constantly have to do that is because flu has become endemic. So that same conversation I had about the virus entering your body and being expelled as something different, and error rates and replication, a whole lot of shots on goal lead to a whole lot of opportunities for the virus to modify itself. Same situation we're in dealing with COVID. Because people are so damn stubborn, because people have taken this whole individual aspect of a public health concern, we've given COVID hundreds of millions, of billions, of trillions of opportunities to modify itself through errors in replication and through exposure. I said hundreds of billions of trillions because single infection isn't just one virus cell. You've got replication that occurs, and you have billions of virus cells in your body. You expel those, and then those replicate, and the scale is astronomical. It's really unfathomable about viruses. But I just wanted to say those numbers to highlight that. But because we've got people out here that refuse to get vaccinated still, we've reached a point where we're applying just enough pressure to COVID to force it to evolve. Survival of the fittest. In its truest sense, its Darwinian sense, pressures against survival force adaptation. Being vaccinated applied pressure to COVID, but because we hadn't reached a high enough level of saturation of vaccination, and we also started to ease social distancing restrictions, mask wearing, and all of those other things, we've allowed the virus to become something different. An entirely different evolutionary strain. Not slight modifications, but major enough to make potential vaccinations and boosters ineffective. Talking like this without having something to drink, making my mouth dry. So, it's our fault. And when I say our, I mean humanity at large, while we're dealing with a virus that could cripple you. But if it doesn't cripple you, we treat it as if it's only mild because you didn't die. But did you die is funny when you're dealing with something that's not going to change the world economically and socially for years to come. Long COVID cases are going to destroy the healthcare system in the U.S. And a lot of people's finances because our system isn't set up for handling long-term illness well. Here's what to expect next. Booster shots. Moderna data comes out and says that booster from Moderna is enough to raise antibody levels to provide protection against the Omicron variant. It's excellent news. Pfizer, the same. You also had FDA news to suggest that people don't take the J&J vaccine. I hate that news because to me, the risk reward is strong enough. You had hundreds of millions of doses of the J&J vaccine delivered globally. You've had 9 people die as a result, and that is statistically insignificant for global cases. For those 9 individuals and their families, absolutely terrifying, absolutely heartbreaking. At a micro view like that, it's very disappointing. But on a macro view, on a large scale view, we need as many shots in arms as possible for the very reasons that I've been talking for 15 minutes. Catching COVID is not something you want to do. Whether you die or go to the hospital, who wants to have chronic fatigue, myocarditis, POTS, neuralgia, loss of senses, headaches, migraines? Who wants those things? Regardless of if you die or not. Yeah, it's 1.5%, 2% or whatever mortality rate. Being vaccinated reduces that to like 0.0001% mortality, which is crazy to me when you think about scale and how people don't realize how much more protected you are from dying with vaccinations, regardless of natural immunity. Vaccines are more effective at providing long-term immunity than natural immunity. But the longer we stay at this mid-level of vaccination, sub 75, 80%, the longer we allow the thing to circulate, the higher the risk we run into of making all the vaccinations that we've had useless because of a variant that is so modified that we no longer have antibodies that can defend against it. It's an inevitability when you have so many exposures to the virus and we're not doing enough to mitigate transmission. I fully expect in a perfect world and in a world where leadership is not asleep at the wheel for us to go back or go to actual lockdown restrictions. No contact, no enclosed spaces, exposure to COVID resulting in quarantine. But we can't do that without finances and financial support. We absolutely have to put dollars in people's hands, and we absolutely have to make it so that if you catch COVID, you can afford to stay isolated and you have somewhere to go if you have people that are at risk, immunocompromised, unable to be vaccinated, or work in a densely populated or live in a densely populated area. There's a program in New York where if you catch COVID, the state will provide you with a place to stay and meals so you can quarantine if you have densely populated or people that are immune compromised. Programs like that should be available nationwide. We can't afford to allow COVID to run through households and workplaces and potentially cause long-term effects beyond just dying. That's a big thing, though. We have so many people that deny that it's a risk, that deny that it's an issue, that we can't overcome the social aspects in the how politicized it's become to deal with the actual economic and health ramifications of COVID. It sucks. Excuse my language, it's fucking stupid. COVID's been very lucrative for me in my personal career. I've had the opportunity to work with some high-level science, developing and helping to validate assays that test for COVID, antibody tests that can test your levels of vaccination and determine the source of your immunity, whether you got it from being exposed or if your booster shot or your COVID vaccination are why you have immunity. I've had the opportunity to do and touch and see data that generate, touch, and see data that others haven't had the chance to see. I've had the chance to make more money and get deeper into my career because of COVID. That's cool and all, but I would much rather for this shit to be over with. I've got people that I trust, that people that I've known for a long time, that have not been vaccinated yet because they think they had COVID back in 2019, early 2020. That's cool. Thinking that you have natural immunity is great. But it's irresponsible and intellectually dishonest for you to say, I thought I had it, and that's enough for me. And even worse, when you have those discussions with people of faith, and they say, I trust God to protect me, and I've listened to God, and He hasn't told me to get vaccinated. As if God is going to give you a bespoke message about something that's affecting all of His children. As if scientists don't also listen to and talk to God. That is disrespectful to me, and I hate it. And I hate it. I absolutely believe God delivers messages to individuals, and He will teach and preach to and minister to people in unique ways. But when you have something that has killed millions of His children, infected, damaged, hurt, and maimed millions of others, this take that God has spoken to you and told you not to get vaccinated or it's not necessary is crazy to me. No, He hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but He's also given us scientists and medicine. In His time living to 40, Jesus' time living in 40 to 50 was an accomplishment. Because if you stubbed your toe, cut your toe open, stepped on a nail, or did anything like that, you died. We've evolved science and medicine far beyond relying on prayer and onions and socks. Prayer and faith absolutely have a place in dealing with COVID, if for nothing else, but it helps keep calm, and meditation has powerful effects for your immune system and reducing stress, which is another issue. We're going to have an entire generation of children that have grown up with mask wearing and without parents, because we've allowed 800,000 adults and teenagers and kids to die from something that we didn't have to have happen. We're going to have an entire generation of people with PTSD from the economic impacts and from the fear of exposure to a respiratory disease. But that's not enough for us to make wholesale changes to protect people. We keep coming out with half measures and partial measures and half-baked ideas. We absolutely need to treat COVID different. We cannot afford for this virus to become endemic. We cannot afford, in a literal or figurative sense, for that to happen. The burden on the healthcare system is going to be ridiculous for years to come as if it isn't already. You're going to lose doctors, you're going to lose nurses just from stress, and you're going to lose people from a lack of resources because COVID has taken them all up. We keep playing, and another variant is going to pop up that will set us back to early 2020. It's going to set us back to winter 2020. With hospitals full, ICUs full, ventilator use maxed out, refrigerated trucks for bodies, and all of that. We have to be better. We have to. It makes no sense for us to be going into year 3 and we're still debating about the basic things to protect ourselves and our families and others. It's stupid. And I'm frustrated. And I hate that I have to have these discussions. It's dumb. The people that need to hear this, at this point, you're being so willfully ignorant that you're willing to sacrifice so many people's lives and so many people's quality of life because of your individuality. I hate it here. So stupid. We have to do and be better. I love y'all. Even y'all that are not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Even the people that won't listen to this advice, that won't watch this long video. I love you. I want us to all be safe. I don't want anybody else to have to die from something that they don't have to die from. I don't want anybody else to deal with long-term neurological effects or some other effect of catching this virus. I'm annoyed. I'm frustrated. I'm heartbroken. But all I can do is share information with people and hope that we're mature enough to make the right choices. I love y'all. JJ out.